Hello there. We're in Germany, in Nuremberg. We're looking at the Kaiserburg castle, which is the imperial castle of the city. Very grand, very imposing. Sitting up on the hill on the northern side, a must, basically. If you ever go to Nuremberg, it's you can't really miss it. As you look up from the city, you'll see it kind of looming down in a very imposing but still somehow picturesque way. It's a wonderful thing about those kind of castles, that obviously they were built purely with practical intentions in mind, but by heavens, they're pretty things. Now, I found this particular view where literally, as I walked around the castle thinking, oh my God, I could draw this, turn this corner and saw this. I thought, that's the one. And I literally just plopped down straight onto the cobbles because there was no other way of sitting there. And as I've said to you in previous videos, there's two kinds of placements when you're doing an urban sketch. You either choose it because there's a seat in a cafe, so you'll draw the view you can, or you find a view that's just so peachy, so perfect, that you'll suffer. You'll suffer the discomfort of, in this case, sitting on cobbled ground. Now, this was a really interesting view. I was really happy with it, so I grabbed the pencil first, which is one of those things I do when I think the challenge is enough that I just want to give myself a safety net. It's a way of reassuring myself there's a tower in the distance, there's a tower in the foreground, very different sizes, these two towers. So in order to get the kind of space between them right, I want to make sure I've kind of ghosted them into the page first. Now you can see when I zoom in that the pencil is very loose. And in fact, I want it to be almost as loose as humanly possible, if that makes sense. I draw it slightly harder than I would normally because of the video, because you need to see it in some way. I'd even prefer just to draw it even fainter than this. It's really just a way of giving myself a sense of where the picture might sit within the page, to make sure it doesn't fall off the side of the page, to make sure these two towers have their space, have their personalities set up in this view. But you can see when I zoom in that the pencil lines are not precious, and that's important to me because I don't want to do a drawing in pencil and then, draw it again in ink over the top. That just seems like a waste of time to me. So genuinely, the pencil lines are there to be the quickest, sort of most casual, purely to get a sense of what some people would call the blocking in, which means where are the big shapes, just so I feel as if this drawing is going to fit on the page in a nice way. Then I'm going to go in with my angle shader brush, so a flat brush that's got a cut angle to the front, which is a very useful brush for doing both lines, so sort of long, thin, linear marks, but also square blocks. And you can see here when I zoom in the sense of the paintbrush able to produce a mark which is in perspective. So as I'm moving the brush around this round foreground tower, that I'm able to actually move the brush in a way that allows it to kind of imply the perspective of the stonework. But you'll also see, I hope, that I'm being very casual about it. I'm not being precious. You can see from the final sketch, top left, that it does become quite a proper drawing. It's the kind of thing that most people would assume takes an amount of time and is careful and considered. But you can see from the actual process that this is due to the layering of the information. It's not because I've drawn it neatly once. It's because I've drawn it roughly once and then slightly less rough on top and then slightly less rough on top. In fact, you can almost argue that there's three kinds of roughness, if that makes any sense, drawn one on top of the other, and they give the illusion of precision and complexity. Now you might ask, but why? Why use this process? Why not draw it sort of perfectly, beautifully once? Well, you can, and many people do, but that's just not interesting for me personally. That feels, again, too much like a job, to draw something well. I'm interested by this process because it's a kind of what I would call a one-handed process, meaning you could have a coffee cup in one hand, meaning you can kind of talk to people, you can be thinking about other stuff. You're kind of part engaged in it. Your head is sort of relaxing as you're going through this process, because you have this trust in the fact you're going to layer the detail, one detail upon the other. So any mark you make is just a sort of an undercolour or a starting point or the beginning. Any mark you make is never the ending. Therefore, you don't ever have to feel pressured about that one mark, because that one mark, if you feel pressured about it, can suddenly, it can lock up inside you, and you can think, oh my God, where's that going to go? Take, for example, blue paint on the ground, kind of implying the shadows. Now that, for some, could be a nerve-wracking mark to make, because ultimately you're thinking this is going to be deep blue and people are going to look at it. How do I know I've done it in the right place? How do I know it's kind of stylistically right, especially when you're using a very kind of casual mop head brush? And the answer is, well, you can't. It's not that anybody's particularly special when they do it. It's not that they somehow know something you don't. They also could easily think, well, that might not be in the right place. All they then think is, but that doesn't matter, because how could it be in the right place? What I'm going to do is overlay it with other things that are going to make it sort of bed in nicely, so the whole thing's going to work in the end, even if it doesn't work necessarily in the beginning, or at least it doesn't work when you first put the mark down. So it's about faith in process rather than it's about being right, because ultimately the point about the urban sketch, the point about drawing when you're actually in front of the object, is that it's impossible to really consider precision as a goal, because look at that view. That's a photograph I took when I was sitting on the ground looking up at that. How is anyone going to draw that precisely when you're actually on site, sitting on the ground looking at it, unable to measure anything, unable to check any angles or proportions or anything? You're just looking at it. It's in 3 dimensions. There's people walking around you, there's wasps and all kinds of stuff going on, and it's living. It's a real thing in front of you. It's a crazy analogy, but it's a bit like if you're drawing an animal, which actually is, to be fair, harder, but still, let me run with it for a sec. If you've ever drawn, a horse or something, you might start by looking at the horse and they're standing in the field. You think, oh, look, pretty horse. You start drawing it and the thing moves, turns, and it's kind of suddenly all over the place. And if you just look at it and think, I need to get that negative space between that leg and the shape of the neck, and if you look at it as a kind of a thing you need to be still, it can't be. It's never going to be still. It's always going to be on the move. Now, in a crazy way, it's a bit like that when you're doing a building like this. Now, the building does stay still, but there's so much of it. Your eyes are forever moving. Your eyes and your focus, where your attention is, that is forever shifting. So the idea of being able to look at a thing like this and sort of precisely analyze angles and proportions and volumes, it's not particularly real, because there's just so much going on that you can feel a bit overwhelmed by the simple amount of work to do. Bearing in mind, when you're sitting on the ground, you want this to happen within 45 minutes, tops. Any more than that, and your backside's well asleep, and you don't need it in your life. The point of a sketch is it should be done within 45 minutes. And just like when you're drawing a horse, here we go, we come back to the horse analogy. It's not about understanding the sort of shapes in an abstract way. It's about understanding the animal, understanding the muscle and the bone and the energy and the character. It's about capturing those things, not treating it like it's a sculpture in a museum and your job is to kind of understand where all the different lines are and make them join up on your page. That's not what we're doing. And if you want to do that, if somebody came to me, let's say Mr. Nuremberg Castle came to me and said, would you mind drawing a beautiful drawing, please, of the castle that I could put on a postcard and sell to the tourists who come here? I don't think I'd sit on the ground and start drawing. I think then I'd do it in a completely different way. If I'm producing a drawing that has to be a true representation, I think I would take 10 times more time. And I'd probably do it in the studio. I'd do it at a table with loads of photographs, being all kind of concerned about getting it right, because all of a sudden it's a thing that matters because it's going to last forever and people are going to people are going to buy the postcard or not. So suddenly I'm on a different kind of level. Suddenly it's a job. This is something I keep saying throughout all these videos. There's a difference between doing sketching as a job and doing it as a relaxing thing to do when you're traveling. And it's about how you pressure yourself. If there's no expectations other than the expectation of you will enjoy it, then for me this is the kind of sketch you do. Something which is free and as precise as you can make it within reason, within your ability. And the more you draw, the more precise you get, because I don't know, I guess that's just experience. I mean, for example, you could look at the cobbles in the ground in the foreground. I've abstracted them, meaning they are vaguely in perspective, but I've forced it and I've pushed them in different directions because I want something interesting in the foreground that kind of sets a story but doesn't attract the eye in the normal way. It's kind of, it's hard to explain that, isn't it? I'm trying to create a sort of abstract frame with that foreground that is both obviously cobbles but is not part of the main drawing. It's just like a framing device. And I've done that completely instinctively. It may or may not work, I don't really care. It's a thing at the time, it was a thing I wanted to try to do to see whether it worked, because that's what sketching is. It's kind of experimental. If I only wanted to get it right, if that was my only goal, correctness, then I'd probably do tests. I'd probably, once I found the way I wanted it to work, I'd do the same way every time. I'd basically repeat myself stylistically. An urban sketch is kind of more immediate and I guess more honest than that, because every urban sketch has what could be considered errors, because it's the human condition, because it's who we are. So when you see urban sketching or artists or people who draw and they're drawing perfect drawings, you kind of have to ask yourself, I wonder if that's the first drawing they did today, or is that the second or third time they've drawn that to get it just so perfect, and that's the version you're seeing. Okay, here I am going off on a tangent, but it's a bit like auto-tune. If you listen to modern music, as in music made in the last 10 years, virtually everything has been processed, auto-tuned, even the best of the bands, even people who are singing live on stage are being auto-tuned. Their voice is being put through a computer program which is correcting the tone of their voice. Now that's because when people go to a band, they want to be able to hear it like it sounds on the CD, as it were. CD, how old-fashioned am I? On their Spotify. And the reality is that's not how people sing when they're singing for 90 minutes and they've had a long day, the voice gets tired, all that kind of stuff. So they're not always in tune, and so the computer helps them to stay in tune. What's the negative in that? Well, it means that young singers, people starting out on the process of singing, hear these bands and say, well, I can't sing like that. I can't sing beautifully and perfectly for 90 minutes every night and never get a note wrong. Whenever I sing, I get notes wrong and it goes all funny. Therefore, I must be a bit rubbish. No, you're not. You're just human. Everybody's like that. It's just that the big bands have the, have the money to have their mistakes erased so you don't hear them. So when you see, beautiful art, be aware that somebody's set out to make it a beautiful piece of art, and therefore it's a job for them, and they've gone about it in a way that gets that goal, including multiple goes at it to get it right. And that's not what an urban sketch is. An urban sketch is, can be wrong, basically. In fact, it should have, I guess, by its essence, there should be elements of wrong in it, because that's part of the essence of the word sketch. It's not urban art. It's not urban illustration. It's urban sketching. And sketching in itself is a word that implies an exploratory, I don't know quite where it is yet, feel to it. And a level of uncertainty, a level of draft. So embrace that, make the mistake, because the mistake is important. Certainly don't fear the mistake, because, God, I was about to say the only thing to fear is fear itself. What a cliche. But you know what I mean. Sketching, it's just fun. Just draw. One of those little tricks is the outline. You'll see me here using the Tombow, using it basically starting for shadows, and then just the awareness that if I can just sharpen up the edges, When people look at the drawing originally, they don't really see the outline. What they see is the plane with the colour, but the outline defines and sharpens. It's a useful little tool. Now we're coming to the end of this drawing. Tonal. I mean, this sense of the blues and the whites, basically two colour, if you can call white a colour, and then that distance that has that kind of sun-kissed kind of stone yellowiness to it. That's the fun fake term, which I think is pentagram, 5-sided tower. That tower, which is distant and massive, I want it to feel as if it's kind of, for some people it'll be the subject because it's warm and therefore it's attracting the eye. For some people, the tower on the right, which is, as I say, smaller, but bright white, for some people that's the subject. And I want that sort of duality, that kind of conflict. These two towers are both saying, look at me. And in essence, that's what that castle is all about. Everywhere you look, your eyes kind of flicking out and saying, oh God, it's that. So that sense of everything wanting to be in your attention. And that's something I want this particular view to be about. And I kind of want people to look at the arch and want to walk through it. That sense of I want to go there, I guess, is the ultimate goal of this view. Sort of the sense of it being part of a journey, of having something to say. Sky's doing a useful job. Not only is it covering up some of the pencil, but it's also that sense of the big bang. It's like fireworks going off behind the tower. When you see the drawing originally, you don't necessarily think of it in that way, but it gives a lot of energy without looking as contrived as it clearly is. And then is often the case a little touch of that same sky somewhere else, like in the ground line, in some of the building parts. That same kind of blue, in this case colour, really helps to make the sky bed in, so it doesn't feel kind of like a weird background difference. It feels an inherent part of everything else. And that's one of those little tricks. If you're going to use a colour, try and use a colour in multiple planes, different parts of the drawing, just to make sure there's that sense of connection. Here's the drawing all done. It really is a beautiful castle, and it gives you a lot. There's so many shapes, curves, angles that you can really enjoy yourself. So if you've listened through to the end, I just want to thank you so very much. It really helps the YouTube things. And why not see if you've got a tower. You've got any towers near you? Why not give a tower a draw? That's your task for the weekend. You enjoy yourself.